The courtroom was packed, every seat in the gallery filled with people sitting in stiff anticipation. A thick, almost suffocating silence clung to the air, each person holding their breath as if afraid to disturb the tension that loomed over the room. The dim overhead lights flickered faintly, their soft buzzing the only sound breaking the stillness. Their dull glow bathed the polished wooden benches in a muted sheen, adding to the atmosphere of quiet gravity. At the very front, presiding over it all from his elevated bench, Judge Richard Holloway sat with an air of impatience. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the desk, a steady, irritated beat. He was a man well into his 60s, with silvered hair neatly combed back and deep lines etched into his face, a face that had spent decades scowling down at defendants. To him, this was nothing more than another tedious case. Another name. Another file. Another person wasting his precious time. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly anticipated, was that today would not be like any other. Today, the person sitting before him was not just another defendant. And today would be the day that his arrogance would cost him everything. Seated at the defense table, Danielle Carter remained still, composed. Her posture was poised, her back straight, as if she were unshaken by the weight of the courtroom's scrutiny. Her face was unreadable, her expression neutral, yet her presence alone demanded attention. She was dressed impeccably, a crisp navy blue suit hugging her frame, her black hair secured into a perfect, professional bun. She looked like she belonged there, not as a defendant, but as something more. But Judge Holloway didn't care to notice. "Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below." To him, she was just another black woman who had somehow gotten herself into trouble. His smirk deepened as he lazily flipped through the case file before him. He hadn't even heard her speak yet, hadn't given her so much as a fair glance, yet in his mind, he had already reached a verdict. This would be easy. He let out a small, amused chuckle, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Well, he mused, his voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, another entitled individual who thinks the law simply doesn't apply to them. A few jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. The prosecutor, a young man in his 30s, pressed his lips into a thin line but remained silent. Danielle, however, didn't react. Not a flinch, not a blink. Her composure remained intact, almost eerie in its steadiness. Judge Holloway glanced up from the papers, his eyes settling on her with an amused glint. "I assume you're here to claim you were wrongfully arrested? That this is all just a big misunderstanding." Soft chuckles rippled through the courtroom, but Danielle's expression remained unchanged. Then, ever so slightly, her lips curled, not in nervousness, not in submission, but in something else. A quiet confidence. The kind of smile that suggested she knew something no one else in that room did. The prosecutor cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, the defendant, Miss Carter." Judge Holloway held up a hand, cutting him off before he could continue. He leaned forward, his smirk widening. "Let's not waste the court's time," he said with feigned boredom. "Why don't you tell me why you think you're special?" And then, for the first time, Danielle spoke. Her voice was smooth, steady, unshaken. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'd rather stick to facts than opinions." For a fraction of a second, the smirk faltered. Barely noticeable, but it was there. He didn't like that. He didn't like the way she carried herself. Too calm, too poised, too in control. Most people in her position fumbled, stuttered, pleaded. But she sat there like she owned the room. "Facts," he repeated, his tone mocking. "All right, Miss Carter. Let's hear your facts." A slow exhale escaped Danielle's lips as she reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. Instantly, the bailiff at the side of the room stiffened, his muscles tensing as his hand hovered near his holster. Judge Holloway let out an exaggerated scoff, already preparing to make a remark about reckless behavior. But before he could get a word out, she withdrew a small black leather case and, with practiced ease, flipped it open. The reaction was instantaneous. For a brief, suspended moment, the entire courtroom froze. All sound ceased. Even the air itself seemed to still. Inside the case, gleaming under the dim overhead lights, was a golden badge. The letters engraved upon it were bold, unmistakable. Judge Holloway's face drained of color. The prosecutor's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering against the desk. From his fingers and clattered onto the table, a few jurors leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Danielle set the badge on the table like a royal flush in a poker game. "My name," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is Special Agent Danielle Carter, United States Secret Service." Judge Holloway's jaw clenched. He was stunned into silence. Danielle let that moment settle before continuing, "And before we proceed any further, I think it's important to acknowledge that my arrest was not only unjustified but also a direct violation of federal law." The judge swallowed hard. Danielle reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a sealed government document. "This," she said, sliding the folder toward the base, "is an official complaint drafted by the Department of Justice. It details the numerous violations committed by the officers who arrested me, including the falsified report that made its way to this courtroom." Judge Holloway's hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You see, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "the officers who arrested me never bothered to check my credentials. Instead said they assumed that because of the color of my skin, I must have been doing something wrong." The prosecutor's face was now a mix of shock and fear. He flipped through his own documents as if trying to piece together how he had missed this information. "And now," Danielle continued, "I find myself sitting in front of a judge who, instead of conducting a fair trial, mocked me before hearing a single piece of evidence." The weight of her words crushed the room. The courtroom was deathly silent. Judge Holloway looked like he had just aged 10 years. His arrogance had vanished, replaced with panic. Danielle straightened her blazer and looked the judge directly in the eye. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about a system that allows people in power to abuse their authority without question. But today, Judge Holloway, you questioned the wrong person." She leaned forward slightly. "And I promise you this is far from over." The prosecutor jumped up. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, the prosecution requests that all charges against Miss Carter be immediately dropped." Judge Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. He cleared his throat. "Case dismissed," he muttered. The gavel slammed down, but for the first time in his career, it wasn't his authority that silenced the room. Danielle gathered her things and walked toward the exit, but before she stepped out, she paused. She turned her head just slightly, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Next time," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "think before you laugh." And with that, she walked out, leaving Judge Holloway sitting there, pale, humiliated, and knowing his career was over, because after today the world would hear about this. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.